Hey, how's it going, do-it-yourselfers? Are you in the market for a used car but want to make sure you're buying a decent car and not a complete lemon? If that's the case, fear none, because today I'm going to go over the top 5 items you need to check when buying a used vehicle. So whenever you go to check out a used car for purchase, you want to make sure you inspect it while the engine is cold, because both the engine and transmission may run differently when they're warm or cold. So first, I recommend you start with a visual inspection of the engine and transmission. And I always start off by checking the condition of the engine oil. And it's going to be impossible for you guys to see the oil on this dipstick because this oil is brand new. But that's okay, because pretty much the only reason I check the engine oil is to make sure that it's not like a milkshake, because then that would suggest that there's potential problem with the head gasket where coolant is getting into the engine. And you obviously want to stay away from that, but even if you see dark oil, that just simply means that oil is old and needs to be replaced. Doesn't necessarily indicate a problem with the engine. Next, if the car comes with one, you want to open the radiator cap, or if it's got a coolant reservoir, you want to open the cap to that and inspect the coolant. Again, you want to see nice clean coolant and no milkshake stuff, because again, that would indicate coolant mixing with oil. Another tip I can give you is if you're inspecting a car that has a radiator cap, you obviously not only want to inspect the radiator cap, but also go ahead and take a look inside the overflow tank as well. Because if there is a problem with the head gasket and milkshake-like coolant gets inside of this, it's really hard to try to hide it. Whereas if it's a small leak with the head gasket, let's say, they can just clean this off, top off the coolant, and then you may not be able to tell whether there's a problem or not. Next up, if you're lucky enough to have a dipstick for your transmission, it's time to check the condition of the transmission fluid. Now, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see, but basically brand new transmission usually looks pink. Worn transmission looks like dark brown, which is the case here, and that's perfectly normal. Now, if the color of the transmission fluid is really dark, but not just that, it also smells really bad, then that's a bad sign. It probably means that the internals of the transmission, like the clutches, are breaking apart, causing that smell, and you want to stay away from that vehicle. So next, we're going to inspect the oil cap as well. Now, when inspecting this, if you see milkshake on this, do not be alarmed. That's usually simply moisture that's inside the engine. However, you want to inspect this for buildup, because if you see a lot of buildup on this, that may mean that they have not been keeping up with the maintenance on the engine, like oil changes. Maybe there's a problem with the PCV system or other things. Next, you also want to check out the power steering fluid and make sure it's nice and clean, and also your brake fluid as well. Now, the odds are the brake fluid is usually pretty clean, but if you see dirty power steering fluid, you may be alarmed, because that means there might be a problem with either the power steering rack and pinion or the hose and the tubing that goes to it. Next, you want to do a quick inspection of the battery terminals and make sure there's no heavy buildup like we got here, because that could mean this battery is on its way out, and indeed that's the case. This battery is actually completely dead. Next, you want to inspect the drive belts. It's going to be really hard to show you guys, but basically you want to see the inside of the belt and make sure it's not badly cracked or damaged. And also, if the engine on the car you're inspecting comes with a timing belt, you want to make sure and find out exactly when it has been replaced. Because if the timing belt hasn't been replaced on time and it breaks, and if you have an interference engine, the valves are going to hit your pistons, and basically you're going to be in need of a new engine. All right, so there's the visual inspection of the engine bay. So next, we're going to check out our tires, because as you may know, tires can be very expensive to replace. Also, this is not going to be simply checking the treads on the tire, because even if you have good treads on a tire, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good tire. All right, so basically you obviously want to check out the treads, make sure there's enough meat both on the outside of the tire, and also get underneath and check and make sure that the inside of the tire is not worn out as well. So in order to properly inspect tires, you want to put both of your hands on top of the tire and then run them down and try to feel for any unevenness or any bumps. If you feel any bumps, that may mean there's a problem with the tire, maybe it's going bad, or there might even be a problem with the suspension that's causing that. Also, if you don't feel any bumps, but your hand is catching every edge on the treads on this tire. So what I mean is, when you're running your hand down, it's catching every edge like this, and it's not allowing you to run your hand down the tire smoothly. That usually indicates a problem with either the struts or shocks. They're either bad or worn out and allowing for your wheel to bounce up and down as you're going down the road, damaging the edge of the treads on your tire. All right, up next, we're going to go back to inspecting the engine and transmission while the car is running. Actually, first, get in the car, put the key in the ignition, and turn it to the on position. And when you do that, you want to make sure your check engine light, your airbag light, and your ABS light, if your car is equipped with one, comes on. And next, we'll start the car. All right, so with the engine running, you obviously want to listen for any kind of ticking or knocking noises. Those are definitely bad signs. Next, we'll get in the car and rev the engine, and again, make sure it's not making any unusual noises. This engine purrs like a kitten. I think I'm gonna buy my own car. All right, next we'll get in the car, put our foot on the brake pedal, and then we're gonna run the gear selector through every gear all the way down and then back up, waiting about a second or two between each gear selection. And obviously after each gear change, we want to make sure that the transmission shifts smoothly and there's no big jolt, because then that would potentially indicate a problem with either the transmission or maybe the mounts. But either way, we don't want any hard shifts. So here's reverse, not bad. Neutral, drive, neutral, reverse, park. All right, so there's that. But next we're going to scan our car's computer for any fault codes and also check on the emissions monitors as well. Now you obviously need a scanner for this, but these are not very expensive. You can get one for under 30 bucks probably on eBay or Amazon. But again, it's important to make sure that the one you buy can not only scan for codes, but that it can also check on the emissions monitor readiness as well. And then we plug in our scanner, and operating these is pretty simple. You basically go to read codes, and it will scan your car's PCM. As you can see, we got a P0011, which is a cam position actuator A, bank 1, timing over advance. Again, this is why it's important to try to get a scanner to do this, because not always you get a check engine light when you have a code stored in your car's computer. All right, so now we go back and we're gonna check our emissions monitors. So we go down here to where it says IM monitors, enter. So up top, as you can see, we got 3 OKs for those 3 monitors. Sometimes it's going to say ready, depending on your scanner. But right here on the bottom where it says incomplete for those monitors, that means that that system or that monitor has not gone through a certain number of drive cycles. Now, every time you erase the code using a scanner, or you can do the same thing, or in other words, erase the code or reset your car's computer by disconnecting the battery, each monitor has to go through a certain number of drive cycles. Now, sometimes people get check engine lights, like for that code that we had, and they disconnect the battery or erase the codes in order to get rid of that check engine light and sell their cars. But if you have a scanner that can read the emissions monitors, you can see if you have an incomplete one, that means that car had recently either had the codes erased or the battery disconnected to reset the car's computer. Now, if you see if one of the monitors is incomplete, don't rush into judgment and assume that the seller is trying to hide something. But they do have to have a good explanation. You know, if the battery was replaced, they need to have a receipt, or if the car was at a mechanic shop where it had the codes erased, they obviously need to provide some receipt and paperwork for that as well. All right, so next we're going to check the body of this car and make sure that the frame and the subframe are okay and that this car has not been in a major collision previously. So I usually start at the front of the car. I check the gaps between the hood and the fender, make sure not only they're even all the way down, but also they line up perfectly up top and on the bottom, in this case with the bumper. As you can see, it's a little off here. We'll inspect this further in a bit. You want to check and make sure this air gap here up top and on the bottom is nice and even all the way around. Now, these plastic bumper covers are a little bit more tricky to check because people are always banging their cars into shopping carts and stuff, and these move around a little bit. So if it's a little uneven right next to the headlight or on the edges, it's probably not a big deal. All right, so next we'll straighten out our steering wheel, and then we look at our front wheels from up top and make sure if they're coming out of the fender, it's by the same distance on both sides. Also, you want to make sure the distance between each tire and the front panel is the same from front to the back. All right, next we're going to go on the side of the car and make sure all the body lines line up perfectly from one panel to another. Now, I find that if you go to the back of the car at about a 30 to 40 degrees angle, you can tell a lot better whether the body lines are lining up or not. Also, from the rear, you can tell whether this car, maybe if it was in a collision and one of these doors was replaced, or maybe there was a dent here where this door stuck out a little bit. From that angle, you can tell better because you're going to be able to see the gap more easily. So for example, this gap right here, this front door, is sticking out just a tiny amount. Now, however, when we open the door, we can see that this door has the same VIN number as the car. So this is the original door. So if door was damaged previously, it was not bad enough where it was required to replace it. So it's probably not a big deal, especially on an old used car like this. All right, so next up, we're going to open the hood. And first we're going to check this front radiator support, especially this front lip area, because if ever this car was in a front-end collision where damage was done to this radiator support, it's going to be really hard to try to flatten that out and make it look like factory again. Also, you should look at the welds around the corners, make sure they look the same on both sides and look factory. Also inspect the bolts that are holding the fenders in, because as you can see, these are painted, and if these fenders were ever removed, when you get a socket on these, it's going to scratch them up and be obvious. Also, if there's a VIN number sticker on the fenders, make sure they match with the car. And the same goes for the hood. All right, next you want to go to the back of the car and open the trunk or the lift gate in our case. And again, inspect the factory plug welds you see here. Make sure they're nice and smooth, and also check the seam sealer that they put on these when they come out of the factory, and make sure both sides look the same or very similar at the very least. Also, if you don't have this mess going on that we have here, you can always inspect the spare tire well and check the seams and make sure they look factory as well. All right, now keep in mind I made this video short and to the point for a reason, but as a result, it left out some things, including the drive test. Now, when you go on a drive test, I suggest that, again, you start off with the cold engine and you start accelerating slowly and make sure you feel every shift from each gear to the next. And then once you reach the top gear and you start slowing down, you feel every downshift and all are smooth. After that, when the engine is warmed up and the transmission is also warm, then you can accelerate faster. Still, don't floor it. That sometimes actually hides problems with the transmission. And again, when you're accelerating faster, try to feel every shift and make sure everything is smooth. So that's it. Hope this video helps you avoid buying any lemons out there. Now, if you want to know what cars I suggest buying for different price ranges, I put some links to videos I made recently on this side of the screen that you can check out. There will also be links down below in the description box as well. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.